Yes! Yes!
A Lego set is a gift that always clicks. And clicks. Ooh, ooh, and clicks. For kids who love to save the day, choose a Lego set. A gift that always clicks.
What happens when the secret you were told to keep becomes the wound that quietly shapes every choice you make for decades? Ranae grew up in a small Minnesota town where everyone knew everyone. And as a preteen, she was sexually abused by boys she had known her entire life. Then she was told to never speak of it again, not because it wasn't real, but because if she did, people might think she was bad. She wasn't bad, but she believed it anyway. And that belief quietly drove everything. The people-pleasing, the self-sabotage, the way she got tangled up in something she couldn't find her way out of, until one morning she gave herself two choices, and she picked the harder one. Ranae served 51 months in federal prison, and she'll tell you that the day she walked in was the day that her healing finally began.
I looked in the mirror and I said, today you have two choices. And either A, use the gun in your husband in Kevin's closet, or B, turn myself in.
You're listening to the Life Shift Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Gilhooly. This show is built around one simple idea, that sometimes a single moment can change how we see everything. Each week, I talk with someone about the moment that shifted their life and how they learned to live differently after it. These are not stories about having it all figured out. They are stories about what it looks like to keep going once the story changes. Thank you for being here. Here's today's story. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Shift Podcast. I am here with Ranae. Hello, Ranae.
Hello, Matt. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to talk to you and your guests.
Well, thank you for wanting to be a part of the Life Shift Podcast. We have been trying to do this now for a few months, and I'm glad that we were able to make it happen. And I think maybe the universe had to play in that, and maybe this is the right time for us to have this conversation.
I totally agree. But I'm glad it did work out. And again, I'm excited to talk about my story and find out more about the Life Shift.
Well, the Life Shift has been this journey that I never really could have imagined for myself. And I say that a lot, and it feels funny to say it a lot, but it's so true that I just never thought I would have the opportunity after what, my own experiences to be able to talk to so many people from around the world about like really deeply personal moments and seeing how we as humans honestly, truly have so much more in common, even though our stories are wildly different. The way we feel about things, the way we think about ourselves in these particular moments, there's so much commonality, and it's nice to see. It creates a really beautiful connection. So I'm really blessed to just be able to have these conversations.
Yep. And I do agree with you. I so feel after speaking to the people I've had the opportunity to speak with and hear their stories and find out, what their life shift was, that we have so much more in common than we do differences. And we need to remember that to make the world just a better place. So
it's so cheesy, but it's so true.
It's cheesy. I know it's cheesy, but it's true. So
yeah. And it's one thing to say it. Like, I feel like maybe 20 years ago, I would say, oh, we have so much more in common than we have that separates us. And now, like, to live it and truly understand it is a totally different thing. You're like, oh, that really is true, which is cool.
It is. And I always say now, if someone's going through something or if they've made a bad choice, I used to say, oh, why did they do that? Or, and now I say, oh, what happened to them to make them make that choice? And I think that is true with so many people who do have that, life-changing moment. And there's something in their past that, caused them or made something in their head make them make the choice that they did. And that's kind of how I live my life now. So
I love it. I love the openness. I think that's important. I think more people are being a little bit more open now and more vulnerable. And I love that. I wish the younger version of me saw more examples of that growing up in the 80s and 90s, of seeing just adults share more than, the surface level things that we were taught to share.
Yeah.
So it's really nice.
It is, definitely.
Yeah. So before we get into your story, maybe you can tell us who Ranae is in 2026. Like, how do you show up in the world? How do you identify these days?
Well, I'm a mom and a grandma, and I am the founder of a great company called Connecting to Cope. and we talk to people about the things we were just discussing. We talk about how trauma affects your life, what could have led up to the trauma, what came after the trauma, and if you are attempting to heal or ready to heal from the trauma. I'm also a great dog mom to Cope, and thus the name Connecting to Cope. My company is named after him. And, my goal with Connecting to Cope is to connect. And whether that be talking to you about your trauma, leading you in the right direction, or just having you hear my story and maybe, making someone think that they do need to find someone to connect to. And really, that's who I am. But again, being a grandma is the best thing ever. Way better than being a mom. And I have 4 grandchildren. 2 of them are girls, and I spoil them rotten. And it has just made my life a very pleasant thing. And I'm just living life to the best that I can. And I still have bad days, but I tell you what, my good ones outnumber the bad ones nowadays. So I just enjoy life.
I love that. And you're doing the right thing as a grandma. You're spoiling your grandchildren, which is, I think, the number one job requirement of grandparents.
It is. Perfect. It is. Even though my boys don't always agree with that number one job definition or job responsibility, it definitely is. And when I raised 2 boys, so I didn't have girls. Mm-hmm. And when that first girl came along, oh yeah, she's my girl. So, and then I got another one who will be a year next week, and we get to celebrate her on Saturday. So it's awesome. Like I say, life is good, Matt. And with all the bad things happening in the world right now, I try to focus more on the good, positive things that are going on around me than all the negativity. So
and one thing that you said I think is important to just model for other people is acknowledging that you're still having bad days. You're still, you're still a human. You're still going through the things, and not everything is sunshine and rainbows all the time.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I always say you try to get up every day and be better. And some days you succeed, and some days you fail miserably. And you just have to take those days, try to evaluate what happened, and try not to let it happen again. But inevitably, things repeat themselves, and we just try to make better choices, try to make better choices. Not always the best choice, because that's impossible, but try to make better choices every day. And that's what I do.
I love it. So thank you for being a human and showing up in that way. So
I'm definitely human.
Well, that's good, because you never know these days. It could be, podcast robot conversations. So
exactly.
We got to show that we're real here. Can you paint the picture of your life, however far back you need to go, to give us that before version of Ranae, before this main life shift moment, fully understanding that you've probably had many life shift moments, but paint the picture of the before Ranae.
So you need to know the before Ranae, and she's still a big part of me. I mean, she is part of me. I lived in a small town in Southwest Minnesota. There's 572 people is what the population said on the sign outside of my small community. It was a kind of community where everybody knew everybody. And usually your parents knew what you did before you got home. So if you were out being, a little mischievous, they usually knew what you did before you walked in the door, because someone had called them. I am the youngest of 4 girls, the way youngest. I'm 13 years younger than my closest sister. My dad was actually a World War II veteran. So that kind of puts you in, the way my house was. Both of my grandparents, my grandmothers were born here. My grandfathers were both born in Germany and came over. So my parents, my dad and my mom were both raised in homes that were under that. But anyway, back to my small community growing up, again, knew everybody, trusted everybody, was the kind of kid that was pretty happy-go-lucky. Again, I was the youngest. I got spoiled. I sometimes had 4 mothers instead of 1, but we dealt with that. And I had a huge life shift, and I have 2 really big life shifts that we'll talk about today. But the first one was I got sexually abused by 3 boys in my hometown. Boys that I knew my whole life. They were a little older than me, but I trusted them. I trusted them wholeheartedly. And on a certain day, they asked me to go see something at our football field, and the abuse happened. And I can tell you that after that, I was never the same. My trust was gone. I was more fearful. I came home, and something my mother said to me is something that did shape my life forever. And I took it out of context, but as a preteen a lot of time will do, it's hard for someone in that 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old range to process what is being said to you and process an act of violence. And she told me to not talk about what happened to me and to keep it to myself and to never speak of it again, or they would think I was bad, not the boys who did it to me. And now this was in the 1970s. And so that was true. What she told me, was very true during that time. But what I heard out of her mouth was not that they would think, but that I was bad. And so my life shift changed. Still a good kid in school, got straight A's.
Were you better after?
What?
Were you better academically after?
No. Okay. Nope. That stayed about the same. That really didn't change. But my trust in humans and my trust in other people really changed. And yeah, just more guarded, just more. I look back now to see how guarded I was, and also started a lot of disassociating. If I was in a situation where any of those boys were, I would just take myself out of the room mentally, feel like I'm watching over a situation. And one of the boys actually married into my family.
Oh, God.
So I dealt with that as well.
Because you're just keeping that secret.
Yes. Yes. And they would hassle me occasionally in school about what happened, but mostly they didn't talk about it either. And yeah, like I say, just a huge life shift, who I became, who I was, how I felt about myself and the world around me really changed that day. And I didn't realize how much until I got older. And
I'm curious. I've unfortunately heard a story similar to this many times. So
yes,
and
not uncommon.
Unfortunately. And I think, then I think of the younger version of you, and had you had outlets like you have now in the world and hearing that this has happened to other people, I can imagine that as a child, do you think that like you're the only one that understands this, that it's a shameful thing that you now have and carry with you? And then every experience that you have with, is it with everybody? Is it with just boys and men after that you feel this like fearful of like not stepping out of line, or like did it totally affect all of your relationships?
It did. So not feeling good enough and the bad part really affected who I was, in high school and in that, that late teen life. I didn't feel I was good enough to have a good boyfriend. So I'd, get blonde cheerleader from Southwest Minnesota, right? There was a few boys that asked me out, but those relationships really never lasted a long time. I had one in high school that lasted a little bit. And when I was 19 years old, I actually met my husband and was the safest person I've ever met. To this day, he is my safe place. And as I've been told by many therapists afterwards, now that I have gone into therapy, my life could have taken a whole different route. I could have become an addict. And I did become an addict, but a people-pleasing addict because I wanted everyone to like me and not to think I was bad. And that's really the direction that the mental illness that came about because of not handling the trauma, that's where it went. People-pleasing. I wanted everyone to like me, everyone to think I was good because in my heart, I knew I was bad. It also affected work life. Also, like I say, quite a smart girl, but not smart in my personal life. I would get a great job. I would get promotions, and I would think that I was not worthy of that. So I would really catastrophize it on my own and quit because I thought they were going to find out that I wasn't as good as they thought I was. When really there was nothing there that was causing that.
Yeah.
But my head was doing all the work.
Yeah, you're putting yourself in a safety space. If they can't fire me, if I fire myself, or
exactly.
Yeah.
If I go to a different place, then I have more time. They won't find out how bad I am.
Yeah.
And
very common. I mean, even in my own experience of losing my mom around the same time that you had your traumatic experience, totally different. But the not understanding thing I really resonate with, of like, you just don't understand. I mean, on the surface, you understand, like, I knew my mom was dead and you knew you had this experience, but the heft of it, I didn't at least take in and fully understand. It felt like abandonment to me. And so for me, I went into the people pleasing, but I also went into the perfectionist aspect of like having to prove that I was worthy, that other people wouldn't leave. Whereas it sounds like you people pleasing, that you are worthy of receiving their love in a way that I feel. So it's that age. I probably a lot of it.
It is. I've heard that, because of the fact that our life changing moments, our traumatic events happened in those preteen years.
Mm-hmm.
You're not quite a teenager, but you're no longer a young child. You're in that in between stage and just trying to start figuring out a few things. And like you say, you felt abandoned, and, I felt like I was totally, I can't even think of the word for it, but I was deceived, by people who I trusted. And, really, I didn't understand what had happened to me totally either. My mom never went into the mechanics of what had happened. And, she made sure I was fine when I got home. But
did she know before you got home?
No.
Okay. It wasn't one of those situations.
Nope. It was not one of those situations. I actually, the crazy part of the whole story is I actually stopped at one of the boys' houses. We had played at his house all the time, kids of all ages, because of the fact that, again, there were so few kids that we all kind of hung out, right? And I stopped and told his mother what I did. And she kind of told me the same thing that my mom did in different words. Don't ever say that to me again, and go home. And so I told my mom that, and I don't know if there were ever words between them. I do not know. Those are things I do not know. My sister closest to me in age knew exactly what happened to me because my mom did tell her, but I think that is the only other living person that my mother told.
Did you feel a sense of like, I guess abandonment is the word that's coming to mind, of that your mom was so dismissive of something that felt?
I did. Okay. I did. And shame, because when someone dismisses something like that, what do you think? Oh, that's very shameful, correct? And so to me, it was shameful. So, those acts as I got older, I could have, as therapists have told me, I could have become addicted to alcohol to hide that shame. I could have become a sex addict because of what happened to me at a very younger age. But those were my inner core, my inner morals, my inner thought, whoever that person was, didn't let those things happen to me. And so I'm very thankful. And sometimes I say to her, to that young girl who is out there, because sometimes she still feels like she's not all part of me, but yet she is. I'm very glad that she was so strong that she didn't let me become that girl. And then she said, this was wrong. And just because one wrong thing happened to you doesn't give you permission to keep doing wrong things. And we'll talk about that thought of mine in a little bit here. But really, that's true. A bad choice doesn't give you permission to keep making more bad choices. And that's something that we really have to remember in daily life. So,
yes. You mentioned meeting your now husband at 19. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Having the experiences that you had since the assault or the abuse that you experienced, how did you find the ability to like let him in? Like, was that hard for you, or was it just like a weird, soft place to land?
It really was a weird, soft place to land. Like I say, he's my person. And even through good times, bad times, whatever, he's always been that person. And he's so understanding. And he always says, I may not always, well, he always says, hate the sin, love the sinner. And that's exactly, how he treats me, is that when I have made poor choices in my life, and still to this day, if I still say something bad about someone or make a poor choice or do something, he'll always be like, I still love you, but we need to rethink thoughts. And I use that on him too, because, as much as I'd like to say he's like this perfect person, there is no perfect person. So we just found each other and, have made it work, and 2 boys and 4 grandkids later. So, and a lot of life changes.
Yeah.
And a lot of life changes, and made the choice to stay. And that's what I tell people if they're talking to me about, losing a partner, due to divorce or breakup or, whatever the situation may be, that we just made the choice to stay, both of us, not just one. We both made the collective choice, and that's where we're at. So,
I think that's beautiful. I think to find a safe place, although life can be chaotic while you have the safe place, but to at least have that person or place or whatever we want to define it as you're going through life, there's something to be said about that. And also probably another reason why, as your therapists have told you, you could have gone in a totally different direction had you not met him, you know?
Most certainly. And, now we'll kind of fast forward a little bit here. So my mid 20s and 30s were spent raising children. And a lot of people with dissociative qualities or dissociative traits actually are good moms. And I think, we don't want anything bad to happen to our kids like it happened to us. And unfortunately, my one son did have a situation with a coach. He turned out okay and has gone through some counseling as well. But we really watched our boys closely, not to the point where we were hovering. I mean, they did their own thing and they were very independent personalities, but we also were just careful with them, and I was careful with them because of what had happened to me. And they are two strong-willed, successful men. And, one of the best things I did was raising my boys. And I'm very fortunate that I was strong enough to do that, along with Kevin. Kevin was a great dad, is a great dad, but went through the 20s, went through the 30s, and started a little side business in my late 30s and early 40s of selling tickets. So secondhand market tickets, kind of like the person standing on the street corner with your ticket. That's kind of where we started. And then when the internet became more popular, of course, we went that route. Got involved, got some really good sales, was making a little extra money at home because Brant, my youngest son, was playing AAU basketball and he got all his basketball paid for because he was good enough. But our travel, of course, was not. So we kind of used it for that and got contacted by another group who was selling tickets. And like they always say, if the thing seems too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Well, it was too good to be true. And I figured out that we were selling tickets that were not actually there really way before I stopped, because I tried to get myself out of the situation. So when I owed people money for tickets, I would, try to sell other tickets to get money. It was a whole thing. And really what they were running was a very poorly run Ponzi scheme. However, they were making money hand over fist. And so when
I kind of got wrapped up in that,
I got wrapped up in it. And before I knew it, I was indebted to them. I was indebted to other people. And I really tried to get myself out of it. And as my prosecuting attorney with the federal government told me, Ranae, when you tried to get yourself out of it is when you started committing crimes. And that is true. I look back now and that is when, my criminal activity started. If I would have turned myself in way earlier and said, this is what's going on, I probably would have got a slap on the wrist and would have not been prosecuted. I just would have been some type of witness. But again, go back to the people pleasing, go back to the you're bad anyway, go back to all the thoughts that I had. And of course, when I was doing this, I didn't realize that that's why my mind took me to where I was and to the choices that I was making. But that's where it led to, is to making choices that led to criminal activity. And very, very sad for what I did to others. Monetary amount, I am told, was small. To me, it's huge. If I owed anybody money, that was a huge thing. And when I turned myself in with my computer, my monetary amount was like $350,000. Not quite there. They upped it and then they took it back down because they can say what you were going to sell. The government can do all kinds of crazy things. But I tell you, to get to that point, one morning I woke up and I knew what was going on and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I looked in the mirror and I said, today you have two choices. And either A, use the gun in your husband in Kevin's closet, or B, turn myself in. And at the time, I didn't know what was the chicken's way out. And sometimes I thought by living that was, that I was too chicken to actually even kill myself. But what I thought was I wanted my boys to know the true story, that yes, I made poor choices, but this is what led to them. And that now I'm going to try to do the right thing to get out of it. And fast forward about 4 years, and I got sentenced to 51 months in a federal prison for wire fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud. And I got prosecuted to the full extent of my sentencing guidelines. And at the time, I thought it was so unfair because other people get so much less and get off and get, reduced sentences. But 51 months is what I had. And really, Matt, the day I turned myself in to federal prison was the day my healing began.
Okay. So it wasn't the earlier steps of going through that whole process. Did you choosing not to use the gun option and choosing to turn yourself in is probably a crazy...
They were steps to healing. They were definitely steps
to healing.
That's a
big step.
It was. I look back at that day and, then in the next 4 years when I had to go through, and so they knew I wasn't going anywhere. They really, truly did. They knew I wasn't going to try to leave. I had my family here. My family was supportive. My boys were here. My husband was here, right? And so they knew I wasn't going anywhere. So my stuff kept getting shoved to the background. And so sitting for almost 4 years in limbo was probably sometimes the most difficult thing. Not knowing, was I going to get time? Was I not going to get time? Were they going to prosecute? Were they not going to prosecute? And actually, up until that 3-year mark, they didn't even have a charge against me in the federal prison system. And then they went through my computer and found one item that would justify as actually mail fraud. And I got charged with 1 count of mail fraud. So.
Yeah, that time period, it's also the things you mentioned, yes, the limbo part, but also it feels like that decision to turn yourself in or to tell everyone that this is own up to it is a big one. But then you're looking for almost this resolution for yourself, not necessarily how's the case going to play out or any of these things, but it was a prolonged, how can I take the next step forward while all of this is still muddying up the background, if you will. Does that feel accurate?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And the funny thing is that you say, when you're in times of dire straits, you find out who your friends are and who really love you, right? And I found out, some really hard lessons. And again, being the people pleaser, having that addiction and then having the disassociative qualities during those years, that played a huge part, the disassociation. Because I honestly can tell you, I remember some of it, but not very much of it. I would have days where I would drive and have no idea how I got where I was. I would meet people who knew me and I had no clue who they were. And, that was just my brain partly protecting me, partly taking me out of the situation and, letting me live a fairly safe life, yet it was not a safe life.
Right.
So I started doing things like putting trackers on my phone so I would know where I was and doing different things like that. But the dissociative qualities was all coming back from, that abuse that happened to me when I was a preteen and not feeling safe and never feeling safe. And then proving to myself that really I am the bad person that I thought my mom told me I was. And so those were really tough days and partly healing days. But like I say, when I started to heal was the day I turned myself in. The only person I had to worry about at that time really was me. I mean, there's nobody else to worry about in prison but yourself. And there's nobody to take care of you in prison but yourself. And that is when my healing journey began. I
mean, and good for you when the healing begins, because I think that could also be a fork in the road in which people you start to lean in more yep, I'm bad. My mom said this, you could really fall down, because I don't know about you, if you've ever been depressed, it sounds like you may have had moments of that. It's much easier to stay there, at least for me, than it is to go the other direction towards the healing, towards all that. So kudos to you for feeling that way. First of all, that this is when it started and being open to healing in that way.
Well, I had a great gal and another person who in my life was, very influential. And she had a doctorate in psychology and psychiatry. And she was with the FBI before she came into the Federal Bureau of Prisons. But she had a personal tragedy, a traumatic event that led her to be more settled down instead of, roaming the country trying to find serial killers, right? so she came to where I was located, and I came into her room, and she chose me. She was high enough up that she could choose who she wanted in to be her patients, to be her people who she was in charge of. And she came in and she said, either we can try to heal and you can tell me what really happened and what's going on in your life, or you can go out and you can go down the road and you can just sit and twiddle your thumbs for an hour 2 times a week. So do you want to heal? Do you want to get better? Do you want to tell me what's really going on with you? Or do you want to go down the hall? What do you want? I'll talk to you tomorrow. Come back and tell me. And that is really how tough she was. 5'2" and just tough as nails and the best at her job. And I went out and I thought, what do I want to do? Do I want to heal? Can I heal? And so the next day I came back to her crying and I said, I want to heal. And I said the word, I want to be better is what I told her. And she said, Ranae, you don't have to be better. That isn't what you're here for. You're here to figure out why you made the choices you made. And we are going to get to the bottom of that and we're going to start healing. And really that was my fork in the road. And, talking about things like earlier, I said, just because you make one bad choice doesn't give you permission to make more. And that is the mantra I lived on in prison is, just because I am here because of a bad choice doesn't mean that I can steal food from the lunchroom or, take drugs or drink hooch or, do whatever it is there. Because you can get in a lot more trouble in prison than you can on the streets, let me tell you. And those are all choices I made. I took every class I could, every class she told me to take. I did the work on every class. I did personal work. I read books. I journaled. I dug deep and found out why I really felt the way that I felt. And a lot of it was because of the trauma that happened to me when I was a preteen. But a lot of it even happened before that. Some of the traumatic events, situations at home. Again, my parents being a lot older, my dad kind of being a quote unquote, being in World War II. I don't want to use the word dictator, but really was a dictator. It was his way or the highway, and never was abusive to me, but was somewhat to my mom and to my older sisters. We walked on eggshells to make sure he was not disturbed. And he had his own trauma from the war, that he had to deal with. And so we were, walking on eggshells, trying not to disrupt that. But after finding out that it was a cumulative of different things that happened to me than just the one traumatic event, almost helped me, I think, and that I had more to heal from than, just the violence and the physical abuse and the sexual abuse, but also from the things that had happened to me and the way my family was structured.
Yeah.
And I think people with trauma look back and they look, okay, there was more. And maybe the big traumatic event affected me the way it did because there was other things that happened before that. So I don't know if that's you too, Matt, if you have anything that maybe happened before your big traumatic event, maybe not. But that's really, my defining moment is when I figured that all out.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't look at them as such, like my parents getting divorced and those things. I guess some people see that. For me, it felt appropriate. I don't know. It's all I remember. They got divorced when I was like 5. I don't know. So I don't remember much before that. Yeah, so
you were almost too young to remember a lot of that.
Exactly. But, I'm really curious, and this idea or thought popped in my mind when you said when she called you into her office, your therapist / psychiatrist and all the things that she does. Did you know you needed to heal from something? Like, did you push your stuff down so deep that you were unsure, or did you in your core know you had all those things building up that you needed healing from?
I think it's a combination, Matt. Okay. I think the people pleasing person, the person on the outside, the person who had, the 2 boys who were 4.0 students and star athletes and the great husband and the great house and the good job and all those things. I think the person that I was showing others didn't think she needed to heal. She just thought, okay, so a couple things happened to me, big deal. I don't even talk about those. And I never talked about them.
Right. Because you were told not to.
I was told not to. And I was bad. So why would I talk? Then people would just know I was bad if I talked about it.
Right.
But in my core, in my heart, with all the disassociating that I had been doing and all the other weird things that had happened and that, the choices that I made, I knew I had to figure it out. And I also knew before I went to prison, I tried to divorce my husband. I said, you do not need to deal with this. This is my problem, not your problem. And he's like, but it is my problem because we have these two wonderful men that we have raised together. And so I want to stay. And he said, but we need to work on some stuff too. He said, I need to work on stuff. You need to work on stuff. We need to work on us. And that's easy. That easily happens, I think, when you're so busy raising your kids and doing all the things that involve them that your relationship just kind of goes south. And so we knew that we had to fix that as well. And I knew in order to fix that, in order to be a better person first for myself and then for other people around me, is I did need to figure out what that core was and, what was in my core. And that is what Katerina helped me do. Is she said, let's try to get where we can start healing you. And then we can start healing relationships. Because before you're better, and again, she said better, but before you're healthier, you're not going to be able to be healthier for other people. And I live my life that way now. If I have a bad day, as we say, or if I let thoughts creep back into my head, because I still do. The days I'm bad, the days, things aren't going right. It's like, okay, yep, I deserve this. I thought things were going good, but here they come again. I just need to use my coping skills, take some self-care days and figure out what's going on and what caused those feelings and, some possible poor choices to come back into my life.
Yeah. As you tell your story, to me, it almost seems like if I was to assign a life shift moment for people, which I don't know why I would do that, but it's almost like when you said yes to Katerina, is that what you said her name is?
Yep.
When you said yes to her, it feels like a big, personal life shift moment, even more so than turning yourself into prison. I'm sure that's a big one as well. But this felt, the way you describe it feels very much like, let's go, let's clean up the room and let's build a different version of ourselves that still has that younger version before, that core that kept you in the semi straight and narrow.
Yep.
Right. And not going down certain addictions.
Yep. I know I'm very fortunate. And I think, addiction can run in families. And my dad was addicted to Valium because that's what they gave you, in World War II and in the 60s when he had a lot of pain. He had a lot of injuries. He got a Purple Heart, had a lot of stuff going on. So he got addicted to that. So I lived with that. And I have a sister who was an alcoholic. And so some addiction in my family, definitely saw some addiction there, but it's just so hard to put my finger on anything but the abuse. And then, like you say, talking to Katerina as my big life shift moments. Everything else was just part of who I was.
Yeah, but these are big decisions. I feel like you had so many choices. And when you made those big decisions to choose yourself over what other people might recommend or whatever that might be, those are big because those are the hard ones. It's so much easier to give in to the other side.
Well, and I tell you, Matt, when I turned myself in and I told the people, that were doing the thing with me that I was going to turn myself in, because I told them and they said, do not do that. They threatened, do not do it. Because the long, short story is that they did get in trouble too. And a lot of it was because I did turn myself in. And, they offered to pay everything off and just let me go. And, I would have got a slap on the wrist and all the things. And I thought, oh, no prison time, just keep moving on. And this was after things were going on. And I said, no. And as hard as that was, and, some of my family members, I don't speak to anymore because they didn't understand that concept. And they also didn't understand the fact that after I got to where I turned myself in, I did talk about what happened to me. And so that was, one of them was married to a family member of mine. And so that caused some problems also. But I was done hiding and done shoving stuff under the rug. My husband didn't even know that that had happened to me. Nope, not until, right before I went in. And the only person alive who knew was my sister that was closest to me in age. And maybe a few other people in town who they had bragged to over the years. And then I kind of heard about it afterwards, but no big deal. I mean, okay, so you did know, you didn't treat me any different. So I guess you're fine. But again, finding out who was in your ballpark is huge in your life. And I'll go back to that a minute, just saying, my friends who stuck by me saying, I know the core of you is good and you made some really bad choices, but we're going to stick with you. And, that was one of them was my husband. And another one was my husband's family, who I didn't always feel super close to. We got married so young. They didn't want us to get married so young. So they were kind of not always so supportive of our marriage. Once kids came along, they were. I mean, they love their grandkids and that's just great. But they supported me. And some people who I didn't even think were my friends supported me. And the people who I thought were my friends kept me at arm's length and were lucky to even speak to me. So that's, I think, why now I told you earlier in the thing, instead of saying, oh my goodness, why did they do that? Now I look at them and say, what happened to them to make them make that choice?
Yeah.
And so I look at people so differently. And that is so much of what Connecting to Cope is about is, why, what happened to you to make you make that choice, to go down that path, to make those choices, because there has to be something behind it. And I found that out in prison, that so many women, were sexually abused, or their parents were drug addicts, or, they came from a criminal family, or, they lived in a low demographic where they had to steal for food and that just became their way of life. And there's so many what happens behind the choices that people make. And that's really where I'm at. So,
yeah, I think what I found toxic for myself as I was starting to find my way through grief 20 years after my mom died was I had used for so long what happened to me as an excuse as to why I did so many things. And so I think there are some people that we want to blame, like it did happen and it did shape a lot of things. But at 45 now, I'm not necessarily saying like, this is happening to me now because of this, because I've healed, right? Like you find the healing and then it's no longer, it happened, it shaped you, you changed, now you're moving through the world differently. Do you see a lot of people in your experiences talking to others that kind of use it as a crutch?
Almost certainly. And I tried for a little bit with Katerina. I tried the tears. This happened to me. And she's like, yep, it did. And there's nothing we can do to change that,
Right.
And it wasn't your fault that it happened, so we went through the work in figuring out that was not your fault. However, subconsciously or consciously, the choices that you made that defined your life, that you made the choice to sell the tickets. You made the choice to turn yourself in. You made the choice to, try to get yourself out of a hole when you probably could have just turned yourself in earlier. Those were all your choices, Ranae. And so that really is another way that I live. And I try to talk to people because, again, they do try to use that trauma or life event or addiction now as a crutch. And you need to evaluate it. And it is part of who you are. And some things are not your fault. But as one of my friends, and I hope none of your friend or listeners are insulted by saying this, but my one friend said, we all have shit. It's just different shit. And you need to learn to live with that. And so that's really, again, what I talk to people about is, okay, let's start healing. If they haven't healed at all, let's get to the bottom of what happened to you, why you're making the choices, why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Find some good coping skills, start some self-care, find a program that works for you, a behavioral therapy that works for you. But at the end of the day, the choices you're making now are on you. And that's a tough thing for people to accept. That was tough for me to accept. It's like, I can't blame this for the rest of my life. Well, why not? It's like, why not?
But I think that's the important part to talk about. I think because it's so easy. The easy route is to blame it on that. And, like I think about the time in my teenage years when I would do really well on something, or I would get a part in a show, or something good happened. I was like, well, that's because my mom's dead and they just felt bad for me. So that they gave me this, like that was my award. But on the same day, something bad could happen to me. And it was because my mom died, and I look back on it, I'm like, that's so irrational, but also makes sense in a weird way because I was so messed up and not through any kind of healing. But it's just so easy to use something like that as a crutch if you don't have the right tools to move forward and really own who you are in the moment and what you're doing in the moment as your own and not what happened to you.
Yeah, like you say, you weren't owning the positive things that were happening to you, even though you worked hard to, get your part in the show or to, whatever, get an A on your test or do whatever you were doing. You weren't going to take that because they were just being nice to you. But then also in the same context, it's like, oh, this happened to me today. I fell down on my bike and, it's because this happened because my mom passed away, or someone was mean to me because my mom passed away. Or,
well, that was true.
Yeah.
Because kids are ruthless.
I know. Trust me, I know. Kids are ruthless. I would not go back to my teenage years for anything, especially. No, I wouldn't. I would not go back. But yeah, it's just, I think you start taking responsibility for your own actions. And you also realize that the only person who can control you is you. And so the good, the bad, and the ugly, that's all on you. It's all on you.
Yeah.
People can say something to you and how something negative, and how you process that is on you. And someone can say something good to you and how you process that is on you. And it's hard to take both of those things. So
yeah, the thing that really helped me, and it's so simple, but was acknowledging how I felt and that it was okay in any moment. Like as I got older, like it's okay if I have a bad day. I have the tools to work through it. Whereas before it was like, I feel bad. I need to feel good. I need to show that I'm better. Like, why do I feel, and it was so messy, but when you acknowledge it and you kind of move through it in the way that you know how, in the appropriate way, it's so much easier to kind of be that authentic version of yourself instead of what you think other people need to see of you. It
is. And, rational self-analysis, such a good tool for people. And, just basic cognitive skills, processing emotions and processing feelings and, processing actions versus feelings. And, those are all things that help when you're going through that healing process. And I think healing is never a straight line. Healing, you can be way up here one day and you made a huge breakthrough if, you're still in therapy. And I will be, I think, forever a lifelong therapy person. I like talking about my feelings and it helps me continue to be on that straight and narrow road. But some days I'm way down here. And then for a week, I'll just be, linear and it'll be great. But I think, healing is lifelong, just like learning is lifelong. And I think a lot of times the two go hand in hand. Finding out and learning more about yourself is a huge tool as well. And, finding out how you process different emotions is a huge healing tool. So,
yeah. What was the Ranae like the day you got home from prison?
So I never talk about like the day I got home. I talk about when I walked out. And I thought to myself, for the first time in my life, I am actually free. And I did feel free. I felt like, I've done so much work. I know that I am not that bad person who I thought I was. Did I make some very bad choices? I did, but I am not the culmination of my worst event, or I am the culmination of all of me, of the good and the bad. And I truly felt free when I walked to the car and my husband was waiting for me. I felt so free. And the funny story is we weren't going to tell my boys because there was a couple times I was supposed to get out. I didn't get out. It was all during COVID. So things happened, COVID happened. And I got in the car, and after giving me a hug and a kiss and talking to my husband for a minute, he said, "Oh my gosh, I have to tell you something." And I said, "What?" He said, "Trent got engaged last night." And he was going to wait till I got home, but I had done so many, going to get out, not get out. And I said, "Oh my gosh." And I didn't even think. The old Ranae kicked in, grabbed his cell phone, hit Trent on the thing, and talked to Trent. And it didn't hit him right away either. I'm like, "Oh, congratulations." And obviously I could not have Kevin's cell phone in prison, right? I said, "Oh, congratulations. I'm so happy for you and, your wife." And he goes, "Mom, are you on Dad's cell phone?" And I said, yeah, I said, I just got out. Dad just picked me up. And he started crying immediately and said, this is the best 2 days of my life. And I think now the birth of his children have probably taken, some
Fair.
over that. But at that time,
Yeah.
and so, it was just a joyous day when I got home, and they came over the next day and we had a picnic, and I started home confinement, which was a challenge within itself. I really couldn't work during COVID, so I was alone a lot, and I was used to being around people all day long. Thus, the fact I got my dog Cope, and thus connecting to Cope started. Yeah. And he's the best thing ever. So yeah,
life unfolds sometimes, unfortunately, in the way that we needed it to. And yes, it gives us the things that we need to be this version of ourselves, and makes it hard to want to change things in the past.
Yeah. And I would avoid hurting people. I hurt, my family. I hurt my victims, and I forever, will be regretful of those actions, but I also can't change them. So making them whole is a huge goal of mine, and I'm working on it, with connecting to Cope and different things. So, that's in process. And apologizing. I couldn't talk to them when I was in prison or in home confinement, but I wrote them a letter, all of them, and apologized for my actions and made no excuses. Said those were my choices, and some people accepted it. Some people did not. Most people were not out a high monetary amount, which was good. It was just a lot of people with a very low monetary amount. So I was very thankful for that. But still, it's still, you took something from someone that didn't belong to you. And that is a huge no-no. And so now I think I am more judgmental of people that do things like that. But I also still try to find out why they made the choice they did and what made them do it, what happened to them. So yeah, it's a catch-22. I'm a huge advocate for the prison systems. I worked in education, and I would like to see more educational programs in our system so people get out and we don't have the high recidivism rate. And a huge key to that is to educating people, giving them the skills to get a good job, to go out and, find an apartment and write a resume and know how to dress for a job interview. And all those things need to be done. But I also think we still need prisons. And, people who commit crimes need to be punished. And that's why some advocates don't agree with me, because they want to abolish the prison system. And I'm like, sorry, that doesn't work for me. They're here for a reason. We just need to refine them.
Yeah, I think I can understand that. I also, I keep thinking of how, I don't know the right word, honorable, I guess, it is that you accepted what you did, and you accepted the quote unquote punishment for it, and you did your time, but you made it the best it could be for yourself and the community around you, family, friends, and just the general public, because of the way that you approached your time there.
And I think also, there's a group of us, a group of ladies who will forever be my friends. They are your family when you're in prison. And that's hard for people. You have your own community, and you make your own community. And those ladies got me through some of my toughest days, and I helped get them through some as well. And forever, I will be forever indebted to those women that I was in prison with. And I thank them and I love them all. And what people don't understand is there are so many broken people in prison, and that, prison isn't what you see on television. Maybe Orange is the New Black is close, at least the first season, but then it gets so dramatic. And there is drama, trust me, it's women everywhere. But yeah, it's a community of people. And I like to think by working in education that I tried to make things better for the people that I was in prison with as well, to, teach classes and give them the tools and help give them the tools to be better when they walked out the door. So, yeah, because I know they make me better. So,
hey, that's how we build as people, connections, right?
Yeah.
That's what you do. Curious if this is a silly question, but if this Ranae, 2026 Ranae, could sit next to the Ranae that made option A or option B for herself and chose option B, is there anything that you would want to say to her or be with her?
I think I'd probably tell her that it's going to be okay. There's tough days ahead, and it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to feel, but it's going to be okay. And I think simply.
So people may have just heard me kind of laugh, and that was because I ask a very similar question like this to all 270 guests now, and I will say that 95% of them say that to a different version of themselves. And what's ironic about it is that in that moment, it's not ironic, in that moment, we feel that nothing is going to be okay. How am I going to get through this? How am I going to take the next step? Is it even is option A the better choice in that? And for a lot of people, and so many of us that have been fortunate enough to move through the space, move through our experiences, and look back, so many of us say it's going to be okay. But we wouldn't have believed it.
No, definitely not. At the time, I'll tell you, it would have been easier to choose option A.
Of course, yeah.
But what would I be missing out on? I think of that
These
now.
Grandchildren.
Grandchildren, yes. But even all the great people that I've got to meet and who have helped me and who I've helped. And meeting people like you, Matt. And, it's just talking to people about life experiences. And like you say, connecting to cope. That's why we named it what we did. So
real talk is important. We're
Yes.
not sticking to the surface things. It's like, we're real people. We deserve a real conversation. So if people are interested in maybe connecting with you, learning more about you and your story or whatever, what's the best way to find you, get in your space, tell you their stories?
Sure. I have a website called www.connectingtocope, all spelled out, .com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, and my phone number is listed on all those places. Give me a call. I'll be glad to chat with you for a while.
I love that.
And check me out.
Yeah. I will put those links in the show notes just so it's easy. I encourage people that are listening to these conversations, and if they feel something or something resonated with them or brought up something in a good or not so great way, reach out to these guests, because there is something really powerful about sharing your story. And so these people, if you're feeling it, share it with someone, because Ranae can attest that she held on to a story for a really long time, and maybe she didn't need to.
Yeah, and I wish I could tell all your listeners that all my, criticisms have been constructive and positive, or all of my advice, but they're not. But everything helps. I mean, everything down the road helps. And, as long as I take it the right way, or if someone has something to say to me that they have it to say it the right way, it all helps that person, is really what I'm trying to get out there. So it doesn't have to all be, flowers and rainbows. So.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful that you were willing to go down this conversation the way it unfolded and the way it did.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me, Matt.
Well, thanks again. And thank you to everyone listening. I will be back in a couple days with a brand new episode of the Life Shift Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Life Shift Podcast. If you want to learn more, go to www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com. There you can check out all the different episodes. You can check out the blog, some of the reviews for the podcast, and the Life Shift Journal. Links are there, so you can purchase your own copy, whether in digital or print format. Thanks again.